For the rotational osteotomies, is there any age limit you do? How young of a patient can you take?
That's a great question. So, unlike the last talk, I will wait. So I do have patients who get referred to me who have clearly torsional deformities. All right. In the pediatric population, the pediatric doctors will usually do an MPFL reconstruction, knowing that it's going to fail, and it's not changing the alignment. It's not changing the J side even. It's just decreasing some of their symptoms. I will wait for those patients for the growth plates to stop, because I can't do. I'm not smart enough to do guided growth on a rotational deformity, if that makes sense. So if it's coronal, I think we can do guided growth, just like we did in the last talk. But when it's rotational and I know I need to do a rotation, I'm going to wait till they stop growing.
During your waiting time,
I realize there's two patients with version abnormalities. There are people that patellas dislocate, and people that just come to you, and kind of like one of the questions that, she couldn't run, they just feel twisted. And if you watch these people over years, it's highly dysfunctional. And when you straighten them, they're more satisfied than I would say doing a pure coronal osteotomy. It's because they've lived twisted their whole life, and they've not been validated because we didn't know what was going on. So you have to look for the miserable triad.
In the time when you're waiting for the skeletal maturity to happen, do you suggest any, the way they sit, does it affect the growth modulation? Because most of them tend to sit in this W position. If they are going to sit cross-legged for long in a skeletally immature child, is it going to affect the growth modulation? Anything has been done on it?
I'm not aware of any, making them not sit, W sit. I'm not aware of anything. One of the difficult things about the clinical correlation with hip rotation is not, so that's not, if someone, hip rotation comes from capsular laxity, soft tissue laxity, just not osseous alignment. So just because someone can have pretty significant version, it looks like they have a lot of rotation on their, and they should have a lot of rotation on their anteversion if you measure it, and they're not because of their hip laxity. So I don't stop them from, basically, in my mind, I would try to get the patients through until they're skeletally closed, mature. Many of these patients are females, the majority are females, and so their skeletal maturity is 14 years old, 15 years old, sometimes 13.
Thank you.
As a hip surgeon, I would say that I do think the hip exam, I can predict the CAT scan pretty good. It's not the only thing. Like anything else, there's always soft tissue. If you ask our pediatric orthopedists, they will say W style is fine. As a hip surgeon who understands remodeling, my daughter sat W style. I made her stop, and I forced her to. We can't call it Indian style.
That was my doubt. Yes.
Yeah, I know that was your question. We can't call it Indian style anymore, even though I'm Indian in America. You can't do that. You have to call it crisscross applesauce. That's what we have to call it now. There's a whole other conversation. I'll give a DEI talk later. But that's giving you a positive force to remodel. They won't like it. Their knees will be up, but you're trying to remodel, but that's not going to really do that much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Question at the back.
Yeah. The PSI based HTO, is it a uniplanar correction of the deformity or it's biplanar? Because the previous session did that the open wedge HTO should be biplanar most of the time.
So when you use the word biplanar, is a bad word. Because I don't like to use the word biplanar. What do you mean by biplanar?
He's asking about a biplanar cut.
No, right. And that's why I don't like to use it. Because biplanar to me means two different planes, right? That means controlling the coronal and the sagittal plane. I think the Swiss screwed everything up by calling it a biplanar cut. So a tubercle offset cut, which is what you're saying, you could do this with this system.
So do you have an inbuilt guide to make that vertical cut? You have one. Yes, Mukesh?
Sir, does excessive femoral anteversion and trochlear dysplasia exist together, or is that correlated somewhere and only derotation will take care of subtle trochlear dysplasia?
The short answer to that is yes, it is, but version can happen anywhere along the entire length of the femur. So sometimes version should be addressed more proximally. Many of the patients that I'm dealing with, many of these patients are, these patellofemoral patients, there's a high correlation with dysplasia, trochlear dysplasia, distal femoral dysplasia, and increased anteversion. But it can happen anywhere along the length of the femur, but it does correlate.
You know what I love to talk about femoral version with patellofemoral instability? Because most knee surgeons in the U.S. don't know how to examine a hip. I do half hip, half knee, hip preservation. But this audience, you guys are knee surgeons, you do half sports, half total knees. And I would say, do you externally rotate your femoral component? Right? Why? You're bringing your trochlea to your patella.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's addressing version for a patellofemoral instability patient. It's the same exact thing. One of them is doing it with a cut, a bony cut, and one of them is doing it with an implant. And we've ignored it. My dad invented it with the Ranawat line 25 years ago, but we've ignored it in a patellofemoral patient for many years, except for some rural guy in Michigan named Bob Taiji.
Thank you.
Okay. Rick, you did show in your tips and tricks talk that you had your image intensifier set up so that you can get a quick AP and a quick lateral. Very important question here is that one of the things that we do need to avoid is that we always get stuck so much on the AP view, we forget to do the lateral view. It's okay when you have a PSI guide, but I think the big problem here is that when you're doing a distal femoral osteotomy and you get very fixated on your AP, and then you find that some screws are in the intercondylar notch, your plate is too far posterior or a bit posterior, and then the patient gets a captured knee. So let's say you're not doing the PSI technique before the PSI guide. What have you done in your clinical practice or your surgical practice to avoid this problem? So typically at what stage of putting on a plate would you get a lateral X-ray for an DFO and an HTO to confirm that you are in the right plane?
So I use probably too much fluoroscopy. I want to make sure that I use, if I'm not doing PSI, even if I'm doing PSI cuts down on my fluoroscopy use, but I want to make sure that the fluoroscopic unit can go from AP to lateral without having to move the leg. Bone foam, I use bone foam.
Yeah.
The bone foam, and then also by changing the cant, I can also get a notch view to make sure those screws aren't going into the notch. If I'm doing it without PSI, I would typically put the plate down on the bone before I make my cut to know where that plate's going to be, figure out where my cut's going to be, and look at both AP and laterals. And I'll also use, like one of the speakers used a parallel guide to make sure that I'm staying perpendicular. But because I don't want any surprises.
Yeah, so I think that's a really important point. Before you start fixing your plate, please do take a lateral shoot as well and try and see the plate position not only in the AP but in the lateral as well. Anil,
I'll tell you one thing though.
okay.
I take one lateral X-ray doing HTO now because I have my feeler gauges. One, and that's after my plate's on, because that anterior and posterior validator took a 40-page paper of phrenic noise that was better than any sleeping medication you ever needed, if you ever read that.
Yes.
And has reduced it to that. And those gauges are pre-templated whether I want to do slope neutral, increased slope, or decreased slope.
Absolutely.
And if you do that, you don't need a lateral X-ray.
Yeah, absolutely.
Femur is different because femur is more plate position than tibia is just looking at slope.
What's the downtime on your PSI?
Downtime.
You get a CT scan done today, and after how much time would you have a PSI guide ready for you?
I'd say on average they'll say about 4 to 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
But I'm Anil Ranawat and they make it for me, and he's Rick Hatch, and they make it for them too.
I would give you an example, not the downtime, but so that if that takes some time, but I did a freehand distal femoral derotational osteotomy, which is, I think, is technically one of the hardest surgeries I can do. That took me 2.5, 3 hours to make sure it was pretty.
Yeah.
I did a guided in less than 58 minutes.
Yeah.
And my guide was more accurate, less fluoro, and less gray hair. I mean, and so the time that it takes to get it back is made up in the operating room, decreased risk of complications, and decreased fluoroscopic exposure to your staff.
I have a question for Rick. Maybe I misunderstood, but your first derotation case, you had an anterior chamfer cut. Was that, how could you do that?
That chamfer, so that's actually described by, that's been described by Hinterwinter, where it is a anterior, it's a closing wedge. The Germans were doing this freehand. A closing wedge coming from laterally, and what that allows is when you rotate.
Okay, so it's an oblique cut.
It's an oblique cut.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
you're taking a wedge out, and
so you can rotate and still key it in.
and so you have so much surface area. Plus, it allows you that screw, that anterior posterior screw you see I'm going to put in. Now I have compression on that side. So there's the one problem with doing a transverse derotational osteotomy is you're basically trying to force a malunion on a really unstable thing because it's a transverse cut.
And it's also really hard. Once you cut it, it gets...
Okay, let's talk more about the slope now, because probably I think if you look at the room, there'll be surgeons who will be doing more slope changing osteotomies than derotation osteotomies. Typically, I think the pediatric guys do a lot of derotation rather than the adult knee surgeons. So Anil, now let's come to slope changing. You can change the slope. I'm talking about a deflection osteotomy or slope reducing osteotomy. You can do it above the tubercle, at the tubercle, below the tubercle. Which one, when, and why?
Below the tubercle is easy. It's just you do enough, it's a non-union waiting to happen. Through the tubercle is you're making more surgery and more trauma. Above the tubercle is hardest because there's less real estate, but if you use a PSA guide, it's the easiest and the best healing.
The next question that I have, I think again on the slope, is that if you're looking at a patient who has a high tibial slope and has a primary ACL tear, we're not looking at a revision scenario, we're looking at a primary ACL scenario. What degree of slope would you say that I want to correct this slope?
It's a great question. It's that question happens every day in ACL conference where all the gray hairs
Absolutely.
who think I'm crazy. In America, the people who get slope changing osteotomies are dogs, right? Slope changing osteotomy is a dog operation. Do you guys know that? So my slide's always that I went to medical school to become a vet. And guess what? You know why? Because dogs have high slopes and they did ACL reconstructions and they all failed. So they all do slope. The way they do it's a little different. They do more of a dial osteotomy, but they've been doing it for years. If you're getting in an athlete, the answer is still, we ignore the slope. There is a paper that just came out of Houston, and in Division I college football players and 7 NFL football players, our best athletes with slopes around 14, they've done a primary ACL reconstruction and a slope changing osteotomy. And it took them an extra 3 months to recover, but instead of coming back at 9 months with the primary ACL, they're coming back at 12 months. So I would say that's the patient population that's hardest to deal with, are high-level athletes. My hunch is in the future, we'll be doing it more often. But I'm not going to give you a number. Everybody wants a number. Medicine's not about a number. Medicine's about a compilation of a lot of numbers.
True.
Now, with my patients, I've not done a primary slope reduce on a primary ACL, but I do on all my patients, especially the adolescent patients. I look at slope, and if their slopes increase, it's something I point out to the parents. And all my patients, I point it out that you have risk factors that are there. That way, if they do fail, then my discussion about slope reducing osteotomy is no longer.
Okay.
And if you ever had any doubt of doing an LET,
You should. Possibly, yes.
We all know that closed wedge osteotomy will have less slope correction, that is, it will maintain the slope.
It will
And
decrease
open
the
wedge
slope.
will increase the slope.
Yeah.
Right? So why do you want to do a surgery which will increase the slope and create a later fatigue fracture with ACL reconstruction, rather than doing a closed wedge osteotomy along with ACL reconstruction?
So his question is that when a closing wedge proximal tibial osteotomy is naturally going to decrease the slope vis-a-vis and medial open wedge, which has a tendency to increase the slope, why are we debunking the lateral closing wedge, which is a safer option where you're not going to increase the slope, and moving to a opening wedge, which is more
We are not
likely-
putting the ACL on risk.
You didn't understand a pure sagittal osteotomy is assuming there's no coronal deformity.
We're talking about a coronal plane.
So, right, sir.
Coronal plane, yeah.
And if anything, the paper I showed, I said I won an award, is that, and I said that you guys didn't put in your indications, is slope, my indication is someone with a big coronal deformity that's small, that I can't change the slope, I will do a lateral closing wedge. That's exactly my answer, because it's so much easier to dampen the slope.
So why do you think closed wedge osteotomies have gone out of vogue?
It's 2 cuts versus 1. It's harder to do. And it's harder, it's harder to get that. And the most my question was, what do you do with the fibula?
It's coming back. It's not gone out of the vogue. In fact, in European world, they started doing closed wedge osteotomies because of new implants. I'm very sure next ROC we will have a good talk on closed wedge osteotomy.
Stefano Stefanini uses offset staples that Smith & Nephew built in 1965.
Yeah.
And so, but yes, my point is that osteotomy isn't one size fit all. You have to tailor it. But I do believe it was done too much and got a bad name. My dad's most famous patient, right? Harry Belafonte, God bless his soul, he passed away. I knew Uncle Harry my whole life. I always assumed Uncle Harry had a total knee. One day I saw him, no. He had a lateral closing wedge osteotomy, no fixation. My dad put him in a long leg cast. The guy had it his entire life.
Yeah. Okay.